tonight we want to go back to our Old Testament survey. We started looking at the poetic and wisdom books last Sunday gone, and we focused on the Psalms, and we look at Psalm 51 in particular. Now, that wasn't the original plan for Sunday. I'd planned to do a whole lot more, but when I thought about it, I said, it might be more appropriate for a Sunday morning to do it that way, and then we come back and look at the rest of them, where we can have more discussion. We can have more of a kind of a class forum, you know, as we look at that. So that's what we want to do tonight. We want to look at the rest of the poetic and wisdom literature. And remember, who can remember what is the main question we've been asking about these Old Testament books? Does anybody remember? What's the main question or concern that we have had?
How do we see Jesus in the Hebrew scriptures?
How do they point to Jesus? How do they show us Jesus? Okay? My wife is asking me to turn off her camera for a second while she picks up something that she don't distract anybody. 1 second. Why quickly? There's a plug downstairs. Okay. All right. Yes. So the question is, how do the Hebrew scriptures point to Christ? And we are hoping that we will do that tonight again, and that we'll have some discussion. So let me share my screen. Okay. And then we're going to go into the session. As usual, just tell me when it is that you see the PowerPoint that has come up.
Seeing it.
You're seeing it.
Yes.
And tell me if you see advance.
Yes.
Okay. So some of this we mentioned on Sunday, but I'm going to mention it again. That when we talk about the poetic books, poetic and wisdom literature of the Old Testament, we are talking about a very old tradition, a tradition that is older than the great Greek influence that we talk about all the time. We talk about the Aristotles and the Plato's and so on, okay, and the Roman dramas, the Julius Caesars and so on, much of which we celebrate as being the source of great Western wisdom, the wisdom that has shaped the Western society. But the truth is that the Hebrew poetic and wisdom books were around from before these pieces of literature, okay, or that time period of the Greek and Roman influence. So you're talking about 1,000 to 900 BC when many of these books were written, okay, as compared to 300, 200 BC for the Greeks and the Romans, okay? So we talk about a high point of literature here. And we mentioned this, that when we talk about the poetic and wisdom books, we're talking about 6 books of the Old Testament. Psalms, Songs of Songs, and Lamentation as songbooks. And the wisdom literature being Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. Okay? Those are how we talk about them. I want to do a quick overview of the books. So, for instance, and the book of Job. Job is an epic poem. Epic meaning very long. It's a long poetic book about human suffering and the unseen God of the universe. And we know that the happenings in the book of Job, are the daily happenings in the lives of the life of Job and the lives of Job and his family, are unexplained to Job and his family. They go through these ravages, these difficulties of suffering, not realizing that there's something playing out in the background. This kind of a wager, bet between God and the devil. I don't want to use the word bet, but God is proving something to Satan about his servant Job. Job is classified as being the oldest book of the Old Testament. I don't know how many persons knew that. And or at least if it's not the oldest book, it reflects a time period that is older than all the other periods of the Old Testament's recorded history, except the first 11 chapters of Genesis. This is older than Abraham, you know, and many people have come to that conclusion because of clues in the book, like about how wealth was understood, how payments were made, and things like that. Okay? Very often we hear about the patience of Job. I want to suggest to you that the book is really more about the sovereignty of God than it is about the patience of Job. And there are places in the book where Job is almost at the place of losing patience. And maybe he has even lost patience and he questions God. And God silences him at the end with this thought about what Job can and can't do as compared to what God can do. And this is an outline of the book, a very basic outline. Um, one, chapters 1 and 2 tell us about the background to Job, his circumstances, and his test. And then there's a long period of dialogue. Job, his suffering and his standing before God. Various dialogues with his friends, 3 friends, a dialogue with God. A long passage. I would tell you to read it patiently. Have the patience of Job as you read and read it in small portions. And don't get carried away with the very dense poetry. Okay, it's a very densely poetic book. Try to catch it in small pieces as you read it and get the main ideas as you go. And in the end, chapter 42 is a vindication of Job. Um, in the prayer and the restoration of Job takes place there. Okay? I don't know if anybody has any big question about Job. Let me just show you um, the overall theme of Job is trusted in the sovereignty of God. All right? And life throws us unexpected twists, often very painful. Sometimes we're unsure of God's doing in these twists. But because He runs an orderly universe, we can know that He has not left us to happenstance. I don't know if anybody has any question on the book of Job you want to raise now, before we go on.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Is it fair to say that you mentioned that Job is about the human condition?
Right,
Sorry, about the sovereignty of God, and you also mentioned the human condition.
right.
Is it fair to say that the book of Job is about the friends of Job as much as it is about Job himself? Because so much of it is dedicated to how they perceive God, how they understand him. They try to put him in a box and they try to explain what they don't know. I just
Right.
wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Most definitely, the friends of Job play an important part in the book because the theology that they have is dismissed. Okay, the youngest of Job's friends is the most accurate of the three, but he's still wrong. Okay, he is still wrong. And basically, what we can sum up their theology as is prosperity theology. The idea that if you do good, God's going to bless you. And therefore, if you have bad in your life, it means that God has cursed you because of your sin. Okay? So that is being challenged in the book, and Job's friends are the ones who have this idea. Okay, so yes, they play an essential part in the book.
Thanks, David. And my question was how much related to that? Because Job, most of Job is filled with the wrong theology almost, you could say.
Right,
And so most of Job is not really about instruction. Could you say that it's not really about doing these instructions, but observing just the wrong theology and why it's wrong kind of deal. Follow what I'm saying. As opposed to other books, you can get instruction from almost every chapter, every page.
right,
But
right.
Job is not really like that.
So what
What
we
do you
would
say?
say, yeah, what we would say, it is not a didactic passage or a teaching passage in the sense that these are instructions to follow. But we learn from the picture of the lives of these people, what it is that they believe, the ideas that they express, and how God relates in the end. God doesn't even address them directly. One of the painful things about Job, the book of Job, is that God doesn't even defend himself. God doesn't. He just asks the question, "Can you do this, Job? Can you? Are you able to?" And he calls all these things about creation and so on. Job can't. Job is left to marvel. You know. So in the face of all of the bad theology, as you put it, okay, all the bad theology, all God does is to state his credentials as the God of the universe, the one who holds everything together, and that is sufficient from God's standpoint. Yeah, but it teaches in that way, not directly, as you rightly said.
Got it.
Anybody else on Job? Again, I say Job is a difficult book to read, not because of the story itself, but just because of the dense poetry. Read it in small portions, you know, get a good study Bible when you're reading, and I would suggest that you read it one section at a time. A section is not necessarily a chapter. Look at where the dialogue changes or so on, and read it and try to digest the main ideas as you move forward. All right? How many
David,
persons? Yes, go ahead.
I don't know. I think I don't know if I don't get it. What would you say is the specific lesson, if at all, that we should learn from Job?
Well, the specific lesson from Job is that God is in charge and
Okay.
that we must not judge people based on what the circumstances in their lives. Okay? We shouldn't do that. You have another lesson in mind?
No,
Brother?
David, I'm asking. I'm asking.
Yeah, because you might have an idea, another idea in mind.
No,
Okay?
I don't have. I don't have.
All right. Okay, good. Pat, I see your hand up, Pat.
Yes, Uncle Maurice preempted me. I was thinking that, would you say that Job's experience is applicable to every Christian? In terms of everybody has a Job experience, as we would say. And the
I
context,
think, yes, I think some of us, or most of us, will have times of great difficulty that we can't explain.
yeah,
Okay? And it's one thing that when we have, I have a friend, you see, who very, very committed Christian, who at one time in her life, she decided to go and sleep with a man. And she got pregnant for it. Okay? This happened many years ago. And she came to her senses instantly and just went to her elders and told. Right after the act, she got up and so what have I done? And she went to her elders and she told the elders what happened. And they worked with her through it. That was 20 odd years ago, almost 30 years ago, right? And she has gone through a lot of difficulties as a single parent. Okay? And she understands that it is her actions that have led to all these difficulties that she has had in life with this wonderful daughter who she loves dearly. Okay? But a lot of difficulties have come into her life because of her actions. There's a sense in which many of us have made mistakes in life, and we can trace the evidence of that mistake by the consequences that we live through. All right? But then there are times when, due to no fault of our own and not in response to our actions, hardships take us, and we
right,
have no explanation for them.
right. And then the story of the concept of Job, where we have to get to the point where we recognize that this God in charge, and we can't
Right?
dictate to him what
Most definitely.
should happen. And I think as Uncle Maurice talk about the message or the the lesson.
Right.
I would want to
Yeah.
and other lessons as well.
Yeah. And sometimes God doesn't give you an answer at all, you know, as to why this is happening. You go through the rest of your life not knowing why this has happened. Other times he might give us an answer way down in our lives. Okay. That we start to see everything. Everything is 2020 vision in hindsight. We see what God is doing, but we realize that for such a long time we went through such hardships because we didn't know the answer. Now that God has given us the answer, our eyes are open. But it's just how it is. We don't know. God is sovereign. He decides when he will answer and when he won't.
David, one more
Yeah.
question. Help
Go
us,
ahead.
help me, help us. How would we see Jesus in the book of Job?
How do we see Jesus in the book of Job? John
Yeah.
chapter 9 comes to mind. Okay?
You mean the
John chapter
blind
9
man?
comes with the years. These things happen for the glory of God.
Okay.
Okay? That's the way how I see it. There are sometimes, again, that when our nice pat answers are just insufficient, and God is getting the glory through it. With Jesus, there is no good answer for the crucifixion of Jesus unless God reveal that answer to us.
Amen.
He's an innocent man who committed no crime but was murdered because of jealousy, okay? Because of fear and jealousy and hatred, and they murdered him. And it's only because God has revealed that to us, that the plan to us, why it makes sense to us now, okay? But it is done for God's glory. Whether or not we know it, it's all done for God's glory. That's the way I understand Jesus in Job. Just like Jesus is the whole personification of the struggle of Job. Okay? Jesus lost his life for the glory of God.
Amen.
Okay. Patrick, still have up your hand? All right. Let's move on. We did the Psalms already. That's what we did in the overview. The Psalms, I just mentioned this. I read Psalms, are sung and not read. And that 73 of the Psalms are ascribed to David. 77 are not, and different types of psalms. We looked at that. But what we never looked at in the psalm was that the overall theme, major theme of the psalm is trusting in the law of God. Psalm 1 and Psalm 119 are such psalms that celebrate the law, but many psalms celebrate the law of God. Okay, Psalm 19 also. God's law is the way to live. It gives light and protection even when we are in trouble. Hint, trouble. Even when we are in trouble, God's law is there to help us. Okay? But it is God who is accomplishing the purposes of his law, and he's willing to forgive us when we reach out to him in repentance. And we looked at Psalm 51 on Sunday as an example of that, where David came to an understanding of the law. The law was never meant to make us righteous. Okay? The regulations of the law was never ever meant to be the thing that really pleased God. It's an attitude of heart that is necessary. And David found that and he mentioned that. Foreshadows a time that we see prophesied in Jeremiah and Ezekiel about when we'll have a new heart that will be bent on pleasing God. All right? Let's go to the Proverbs. The I have some friends. I had a friend who died some years ago who read a proverb every day of his life. He says there are 31 proverbs, but that's a proverb. He read a chapter every day of his life. There are 31 chapters, and he read at least one chapter a day for many, many years. Okay, he also had a Bible reading plan that made him read a psalm a day also. You know, Rastaman chant a psalm a day. He wasn't a Rastaman though, and he died a few years ago at a relatively young age. He's about late 50s when he died. Okay, but the Proverbs are these little small pieces of wisdom, small and catchy pieces of wisdom that speak on all aspects of life. You know, I'm positive that everybody has a favorite proverb. Okay, just tell me some of them quickly. Anybody, what is your favorite proverb?
Go to the ant,
Proverbs
thou
12.
sluggard, consider her ways
Wait, go
and be
again, say it again.
wise. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise.
Right, good. Who
Trust in the
else?
Lord
Trust in
with
the
all
Lord.
thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path.
That's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Claudia, I challenge you to go and learn verse 7 too. Anyway,
Okay.
all right.
It's better to do it in corner of a rooftop than to do it with a contentious woman.
I hope you're talking about your wife there, right?
I hope not.
You hope not.
A man of many friends will come to ruin.
Right, right. We have many proverbs. How come the boy don't say, train up a child in the way he should grow? When he's old, he will not depart from it. You know, there are so many. Or Proverbs 31, a virtuous woman. You know, these little, these wonderful pieces of wisdom that the Proverbs tell us. Now, they resonate with many cultures. This is one of the beauties of the Proverbs. You know, you go from culture to culture, and once you translate the idea into the culture, most of them get it because these are truths about every single day of life. Okay, truths about how we live as people, how we ought to live. You know, and so what we see in the Proverbs is the Proverbs is talking about the way of wisdom, and wisdom is described as like a person. Okay, a person. I shouldn't say it's. Wisdom is like a woman and her way. You know, a wise woman and her way. And the central feature of the proverb is the fear of the Lord, because the idea behind these proverbs are that these pieces of truth are coming from God. And when we embrace them and when we live by them, when that is what we call the fear of the Lord. We are living in reverence to God because we understand that He has created life with all these instructions for us living, you know, and that's where wisdom begins, right? And again, this is a very broad outline. You know, wisdom and folly contrasted, chapters 1 to 9. Chapters 1 to 9 are not as small and pithy or pithy, depends how you pronounce the word, as the rest of the book. You have longer passages, longer kind of sections, and so on. You know, and then secondly, we have Proverbs of Salman written and set in order by himself, chapters 10 to 24. Then Proverbs of Solomon set in order by men of Hezekiah, 25 to 29. The Oracle of Agor, an unknown sage in 30, and Proverbs of a mother to Lemuel, 31. Okay. Any questions on the Proverbs?
My question was basically about the authorship, but you kind of answered it there. Because many think that it's written by Solomon mostly. I was kind of just could you just explain a bit more about the authorship of Proverbs.
Okay.
A bit
So,
more.
like in many of the books of the Old Testament, we are very unsure of the authorship. And one of the better explanations I've heard is that there are different ways of understanding authorship. The book is largely about the Proverbs of Solomon. They might have been compiled by someone else unknown, okay, but they are still Solomon's Proverbs, largely, okay. They might, like the Psalms of David, again, the book, the Psalms is attributed to David, but that's because he's the author of most of the Psalms, they were obviously compiled by somebody later than him. So we can understand, if we understand authorship in that way, you know, in my mind at least, it really answers some of the concerns. You know, somebody is later on is compiling all these things that were written from before and existing from before. Somebody is now putting them together and is also compiling other pieces of literature along with them. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, that's fair enough. Thanks, David.
Yeah. Well, I have a question about the Proverbs. I'm going to throw it to you. I want to know how you're going to answer. You, the group. Are the Proverbs promises for us to claim? Mhm.
You know, I had a follow-up question to that, which I was planning to wait until after. I
You
was
want to wait
asking,
until the end?
yeah, no. I was going to ask, how do you reconcile that explanation with our scripture being God-breathed, with our scripture being
Yes.
inspired? How do you reconcile those two? And that's related to what you're asking now. How do you
Yeah,
reconcile?
I have no problem with that. It's God breathed, yes. Whoever wrote them down is God inspired them, and whoever compiled them is God inspired them. I
Okay,
have no problem with that.
okay. Cool.
Okay. But
I
I'm asking, are the Proverbs promises to claim?
would say yes, because the Proverbs is a wisdom book. If we apply
Okay.
wisdom naturally to our life, then some of the things will definitely follow, I believe.
Some.
Well, all.
And Pat has made her case known. Anybody else? Are the Proverbs promises to claim?
Funny, I've always seen the Proverbs more as principles to live by. And if you live
Right.
by these principles, this will happen.
Okay.
So that's how I frame Proverbs, that if you live by these principles, this will happen. So in that sense, I'll say yes. In that sense.
Okay. Richie, I saw you open your mic.
Yeah, just to say that they are not all promises. I mean, they're teachings, but the promises that are there, obviously, we can claim them.
Which are the promises though, Richie? Tell me one of the promises.
Uh, well, Psalm 1 is
You're talking about
is a
Proverbs.
promise. Sorry,
Proverbs are talking.
sorry. Trust in the
Proverbs.
Lord with all thine heart, which is my favorite as well, and he will
Yeah.
direct thy path.
Okay.
Right.
All right. What about a passage like the one I quoted, Proverbs 22, train up a child in the way he should go when he's old, he won't depart from it. Is that a promise to claim?
Yeah, the problem is how do you understand that and then apply that? But
Okay,
it's
good.
definitely a promise.
All right.
Definitely. Yeah.
I'd like to interject if I can.
Sorry, please do.
I think I have always viewed them as Jermaine said, guidelines, and especially in light of what we spoke about
Not
before.
hearing clearly.
You hearing me a little better now? I'm not sure what's happening.
I'm hearing you.
Okay, I was saying that in light of what you mentioned before in terms of Job and the sovereignty of God, I think that's how I viewed the Proverbs, that yes, these are principles, but ultimately God is sovereign. And so there is no guarantee per se that this will happen because you live a particular way. Even though you may follow this particular proverb verbatim. That's how I've seen it.
Okay. Any other comments by anybody before I wait?
Well, David, I'd like to speak to the verse that says, train up a child
Right.
the way he should go, and when he is old, he shall not depart from it. And it's not saying you should not depart from everything, but the basic training that we get at home when we're children, naturally, even if we stray from it, we go back to it naturally. And I do believe that that passage is really true to what it says.
Okay. All right. I happen to lean on. Yes, go ahead. Whoever that
Yeah,
is.
Claudia.
Yeah.
I think some of them are promises and some of them are guidelines.
So how you know the difference? How
I don't
does
know,
some
maybe how they are stated.
right,
So, there are some passages in Proverbs when you read it, you have one verse that's almost contradictory to the next verse following. Like
do
there's
not
one where we
answer a
talk about,
fool according to his
yes,
folly. Answer a
that
fool
one.
according to his folly, right?
Right. So I think there are some that are straight out promises like Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And then there are some which are more guidelines to tell you, if you do this, this is probably what will happen, more than likely.
Right.
If you behave this way, then this is more than likely what the outcome would be. But in all of that, we have to take God's grace and as who said it, either Yannick or Pat, his sovereignty into account for those things.
Yeah. Okay. I like that balance that I'm hearing coming to the group. That's how I weigh on it. That we think that even though it's very difficult to say which are promises and which are just guidelines, but I happen to think that because they are the word of God, we treat them like that. We take them seriously, and we can hold God to His word. Lord, you said this and that and that and that. But at the same time, we recognize that these guidelines hold true most of the time, 90% of the time. We see when you do these things, that particular consequences will follow, whether good or bad. However, we also know that because we live in a fallen world, sometimes we do the right thing and bad happens. It's just a general principle. Most times when we do the right things, good will happen. Okay? But sometimes when we do the right things, bad will happen. So that's the way I treat the Proverbs. I treat the Proverbs as principles, but at the same time, I hold them as promises. When I go to prayer, say, God, you said this and that. So this is what I'm depending on. This is what I'm doing, and I'm asking you to honor your word, understanding the sovereignty of God. Anybody else before we move on?
Yeah, just a final word on this, David.
Sure.
Yeah, man, I think we just need to be careful to differentiate between a promise and a principle. I
Right.
think a promise always holds through, once we satisfy the requirement.
Right.
Whereas with a principle, as you said, there's really no guarantee.
Right. The real challenge we have is just knowing which is which and how we can differentiate between them. Okay? That's the real challenge we have.
I just I wouldn't say that there is no guarantee. I don't know if I agree with Richie on that. Maybe guarantee is a strong word, but I would say that if you want to give a person, the majority of the times, this is what will happen.
Yes.
But as I said, maybe it is that, God in his sovereignty knows that, okay, this is what he wants to accomplish in this particular circumstance in your life. And so maybe he decides that I'm not going to make this hold through this time around because he wants to teach you a lesson.
Right.
Whatever it might be.
Most definitely. But it's just because in the majority of the time, that's what I understood Richie was saying.
Yeah, man, a
when he says
guarantee is
there are no guarantees.
100%. I'm saying
Right.
it's not always 100%.
Right.
Okay.
All right. Let's move on. The Proverbs, a major theme, trust in the Lord of wisdom. Okay. Wisdom for daily living comes from trusting or fearing God. In all aspects of life, God's wisdom is there to guide those who trust it. Let me just mention this in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. You see, in all thy ways acknowledge him. Okay. That word acknowledge there is from the Hebrew word yada, which means to know. All thy ways know him is the same word it has a very wide semantic range, right? Meaning it has a number of different possible meanings, but is the very same word that is used in Genesis that talks about Adam knowing Eve and Eve conceived. So it's talking about an intimate type of knowledge when you look at the uses of the word. So that knowledge is not just like when you pass and acknowledge somebody's presence. It's talking about there an intimate knowledge of God that comes from this growing friendship with Him, knowing God. And that's when we come to recognize the value of God's word. Because the character of God comes through His word, comes out through His word. And you see the goodness of God the more you put His word into practice, and is the more we can trust Him. More we find it, or the easier we find it to trust Him when we know Him more. Okay? So wisdom comes from, when it says fearing God, it has there in that this idea of an intimate knowledge of God, which will lead us to respect Him more. All right? Anybody have any questions on that before I move on? Great. Now we come to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is one of those books that have this larger reflection on life. Okay? Proverbs reflects on many parts of life, but it's this kind of like a narrow wisdom in the sense of how do you make better sense of life, how, in that way. We'll come to Ecclesiastes now. Ecclesiastes is dealing with some really, really, really difficult kinds of principles. And, and just showing us the limitation of human achievement. When you read throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, and again, it's one of those books that you have to read in small doses, because again, it's it's an epic poem. Okay, you read in small doses, and as you read each section, you catch what the major meaning is, and you start to piece it together. But a big part of it is this limitation of human achievement. Humanity and this world is just limited. It's all passing away, you know. And in many senses, the tone of the book is so pessimistic, that many people think that it has no place in the Bible. All right? Everything it says is like smoke or vapor. So this is the outline of the book. 1 to 3, the problem is stated. And then 1:4 to 12:12, experiment made. Okay? About humans seeking satisfaction in the following, in the laws of nature, which is this outline called science, wisdom and philosophy, in pleasure, in materialism, in fatalism, in egoism, in religion, in wealth, even in morality. All of those were an experiment to find meaning in life, and they all failed. All failed. And then Ecclesiastes 12 tells us the whole solution, which is to fear God and to keep His commandments. Okay? But the book is it strikes us as being extremely pessimistic. And I'm going to share at the end, this is the book I'm going to share from. I'm going to cheat a little bit in my sharing, okay, because I came across an interpretation that makes absolute sense. And suddenly the book doesn't sound as pessimistic anymore to me. And I'll share that towards the end. Okay? Trusting in Ecclesiastes is about trusting the Lord for life. Ecclesiastes 12, all is like deceptive and elusive smoke, unless you live and enjoy life by trusting God and keeping His commandments. We have to keep everything in perspective. This is the point. I've been thinking, guys, I am 57 years of age come in 1 month's time. 57 years of age. And I can't believe that. Because last year I was getting saved at age 19. That's where it feels, right? No, I sat down when I remember being in Tobago, and in my last year in Tobago, Alex and I were together, and COVID came and obstructed everything. And, I said, boy, we have to go home, Alex, we have to go home. And they had 6 months to go. We had close to 6 months to go. before we get home. And that 6 month feel like it would never end because you're just sitting on doing nothing. Suddenly I'm realizing that that is over a year ago. Time is flying. All right? And then when you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you just realize again that you have to take your life in perspective. Okay? Because your life is like a dot in the greater scheme of things. Don't take it too seriously in the sense of don't don't overthink life and believe that life is going to provide you with more than it will. Your provision of life, your provision in life comes from how we use it to glorify God. Okay? And I think this is a kind of wisdom that we see that permeates the Bible. When you come to the book of James, that's what James is talking about. Don't talk about what you do next year. You know, you only if it is the will of God. You know, that is what it means in trusting in God. Right? Let's go to one book that we don't read enough, Song of Salman or Song of Songs, Celebration of God's Design in Marriage. It had a hard time being accepted into the canon because of its sex emphasis. It's a very racy book. And I remember old time brethren men had so much difficulties with that sex part of the book that they found ways of reinterpreting it to talk about the love relationship between God and man, but within Jesus and the church. You know, they weren't the first ones to have problems with it. The Jews had problems with it also. It was too racy, and in fact, in some places, at some times, the Jews banned the reading of the book in the synagogue, and you had to be of a certain age before you could hear the reading of the Song of Solomon. It is a very difficult book to understand just because of, again, the poetry, and there's a lot of debate as to how it is laid out. You know, what is the point of the book? Okay, what we do know about the book is that it is a celebration. It seems to be a celebration of marital love, and it is not as racy as we think. If we think of marital love, then it is really a guide to modesty, how a man and his wife can enjoy themselves together, okay, in modest ways. Modest mean that this is not a public performance. This is in privacy, you know, the privacy of their home or wherever they are. Okay. I read something recently that there's one story. I need to check it out if it's true. I'm not certain. There's one story in the book in Song of Solomon that isn't repeated, and that story is in the center of the book. I'm told. I have to go and check it out, which is the wedding night. Everything else is repeated, and so the idea this scholar was saying is that the book is like what we call a chiasm. Chiasm, ideas are repeated except for the one in the center, which is highlighted because it is a unique idea, the unique thought in the book, and that is the wedding night is being held up and celebrated, the culmination of romantic love. Any questions on Song of Songs, Song of Solomon?
So,
Yes.
David,
Yes, go ahead.
a book like this, which we hardly ever read, we hardly ever teach on, I mean, as you say, how do you see Christ in it? One,
Yeah.
how do you, if this is about marital love, shouldn't we be using it more for couples or for marriage ministry or counseling or?
The easier of the two questions to answer is the second one, and the answer is yes. we should be using this book as well as many other books more in our couples ministries or marital ministries or even singles ministry for that matter. Okay, I think we ought to. All right. The first question as to how it points to Christ, I think that the church and the Jews had some they're speaking about it, talking about the love between God and the church and God and his people. I think they had something going there because when you come to look at the book of Ephesians, Paul makes the point of using marriage, the relationship between the husband and the wife, as a picture of what happens between Christ and the church. Okay, you guys know that I read that passage in Ephesians 5 different from most other people. You know, I read it, I understand it differently. I understand that passage of mutual submission. Okay, and that is a picture of Jesus and the church of mutual submission. Jesus is submitting to us as we submit to him. Okay, there's no shame in submission. Jesus submits to us by giving us his life. Jesus submits to us by looking after us instead of having his own way. We see that in the Garden of Gethsemane. Okay? Not my will, but thy will be done. And God's will is for the betterment of his people. So we see that in Jesus. Let this mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who didn't think that equality with God was for his own benefit, grasping for his benefit. Instead, he saw it as giving for the benefit of others. You know, and that happens best in the ideal marriage. Okay? In the ideal marriage. So I see the book mirroring for us what ought to happen in this relationship between us and Christ. Yielding to him yielding to us. I know that's an offensive thought to many people, but this picture of mutual submission, which I think is indeed the picture of God and the church. Anybody else? And by the way, mutual submission brings suffering. You realize that? Married people can't talk, you know. All right. So Song of Solomon talks about trust in the love, in the Lord of love. Okay? 8 verse 6. Love should not be confused with lust, though passionate love is not excluded from godly marriages. It is as couples place their trust in God and his way and serve each other that they increasingly find marital love to be passionate and fulfilling. Okay? And as I've grown older and come to a different stage in my life, I realize that a marital relationship, when we say a marital relationship is based on love, that is not just sex. Okay? It is based on this understanding of caring for each other. Because there are things in life that occur that make sex difficult at times. At times it makes it non-existent. You young people don't want to hear that. All right? There are all kinds of things that happen in people's lives that, yet still it is love, godly love, that keeps the marriage going. I wonder if I can ask anybody to say amen to that. Will anybody say amen to that?
Amen.
Who that? Is that person married?
Amen.
Yes.
Amen.
Sounds great.
Claudia.
Claudia, all right, Claudia, for make sure. So we come to the book of Lamentation, right? A long poem attributed to Jeremiah. In fact, it is one of the fully poetic books that happens in the middle, that is situated in the midst of the prophets in our Bibles. Okay? And so it becomes a prophetic, poetic book. Prophetic there, as we're going to come to learn next time when we come and we look at prophecy. Prophecy doesn't necessarily mean foretelling the future and predicting the future, but it's telling forth the counsel of God, the word of God. Okay? And it's, so it falls in the prophetic tradition, though it is a poetic book. It speaks of, and by the way, the Lamentations, they are a series of laments. They are a series of laments that have been put together. All right? It's not one lament. There are that's what we call lamentations. So one of the things you do when you read the book is that you read each lament by itself. And again, you try to wade through the poetry and get the idea of what it is that the poet is saying. But in it, the
David is frozen.
Looks that way.
Okay.
yeah, so we lost connection for a little bit more, for a little moment. But let's go back. Yeah, so we were looking at the book of Lamentations. We mentioned these points about it. Okay. So we're saying that the book of Lamentations is really Jeremiah's response to the fulfilled prophecy of Judah being taken into exile by Babylon. And he's looking at the wasteland of what is left of Judah, and he's mourning. He's crying out to God. Okay? Crying out to God about how God could have allowed this to happen. It's a book of judgment, but to stop there to miss its major emphasis. God is forgiving and merciful. And one of the greatest hymns of the church comes from the book of Lamentations. Lamentations 3 and verse 22. Great is thy faithfulness, O Lord Almighty. There is no shadow of turning in thee. Thou changest not thy compassions, they fail not. Okay? That song um, comes from that passage. And we sing a chorus sometimes that says, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies, they never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. So the book of Lamentation talks about judgment, but it's also talking about the goodness and mercy, forgiving mercy of God. God is there who is merciful and forgiving our sins. And that obviously points to Jesus. So here is the outline of the book. Okay? That's the outline of the book of Lamentations. Trust in the character of God. God's justice means that he will also punish his people. Yet in the midst of chastening, God's love and mercy are clear as he seeks to restore us. The restoring God. Okay? Restoring God. Okay? Now, I want to move past this. This is what we did on Sunday. And I thought I had eliminated that. I want us to come and spend some time looking at Ecclesiastes again, as I mentioned to you. Ecclesiastes is often described as the most pessimistic book in the Bible. Some do not believe that it belongs there. We want to explore one understanding and then open the platform for further discussion, especially how it points to the Messiah. All right? I'm going to show a video and then we'll talk about it. All right? From the Bible Project. Here goes. Are you hearing it, by the way?
No, we're not hearing.
You're not hearing. So let me stop the sharing and go back and share again and make sure that I enable the share sound. Okay. So tell me, what are you hearing?
We're exploring 3 books in the Bible known as
Yes.
the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And they're all asking the question, what does it mean to live well in this world?
So we've looked at Proverbs, who you could think of as a bright young teacher.
She's all about pursuing wisdom, an attribute of God that's woven into reality. And she's optimistic that if you use wisdom, you will build a successful life.
But then we come to Ecclesiastes, who's more like this sharp, middle-aged critic. And he says,
You think using wisdom will bring you success. You'd better think again, because life here under the sun is meaningless.
And that's a phrase he uses a lot in this book.
but to understand this book, we have to realize first that we're hearing 2 voices.
So first there's the teacher, and we've been calling him the critic. He's the main voice in the book.
But he is introduced to us by another figure, the author. And he's the one who's collected the critic's words, and then at the end of the book summarizes everything and gets the final word.
So why does the author want us to hear from the critic?
Well, he wants to turn your view of the world upside down, and he's going to let the critic explore 3 really disturbing things about the world.
And we should warn you, these are pretty intense.
Yeah, so the first is the march of time, or as the critic says,
Generations come and generations go, but the earth, it's been here long before us and will be long after. No one remembers people from long ago, and all the people yet to come, they too will be forgotten by those who come after them.
So on a cosmic scale, you and I, we are just a blip. Stars are born, and then they die and form planets which orbit new stars, and those planets, they change over time and eventually burn up.
And amidst this cosmic backdrop, my entire existence is like a blink in time.
Which leads to the critic's second disturbing observation, that we are all going to die.
Humans face the same fate as the animals: death. All people, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, those who offer sacrifices to God and those who do not, they all share the same destiny. All this activity and madness, then we all join the dead.
Man, this book is depressing.
And so is the final disturbing thing for the critic, and that is life's random nature.
So in Proverbs, life isn't random. There's a clear cause and effect relationship between doing the right thing and being rewarded.
But the fact is that life doesn't always work that way. The critic has observed a glitch in the system. He calls it chance, or in his words,
The race doesn't always go to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food always come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the educated. Time and chance happen to them all.
So his point is that you can't really control anything in life. It's just way too unpredictable.
So if I want to master life,
Then you're setting yourself up for a fall. Now, throughout the book, the critic uses a metaphor to tie together all of these disturbing ideas. Nearly 40 times he says that everything in life is hevel. It's a Hebrew word that means smoke or vapor. Like smoke, life is beautiful and mysterious.
it takes one shape, and before you know it, it takes a new shape.
And smoke looks solid, but try and grab it, it'll slip right through your fingers.
And when you're stuck in the thick of it, like fog, it's impossible to see clearly.
Now, our modern translations have lost the metaphor, and they usually translate hevel as meaningless. But if you read closely, the critic isn't saying that life has no meaning, but rather that its meaning is never clear. Like smoke, life is confusing, it's disorienting and uncontrollable.
So what are we supposed to do with all of this?
Well, surprisingly, the critic first of all acknowledges the perspective of Proverbs. He says it's a really good idea to learn wisdom and to live in the fear of the Lord.
Really? I mean, he just said that doesn't guarantee success.
But he knows it's the right thing to do. But secondly, and more often, he says that since you can't control your life, you should stop trying. Learn to hold things with an open hand, because you really only have control over one thing, and that's your attitude towards the present moment. Stop worrying, he says, and choose to enjoy a good conversation with a friend, or the sun on your face, or a good meal with people that you care about.
The simple things in life.
Yes, and both the good things and the bad, because both are rich gifts from God. And that's the surprising wisdom of Ecclesiastes.
Listening to the critic is painful and can lead you into some dark places.
And that's why the author speaks up at the end of the book. He doesn't want you to lose hope. He wants to make you humble into someone who trusts that life has meaning even when you can't make sense of it, that one day God will clear the hevel and bring his justice on all that we've done. And so he tells us that the proper response to all of this is to fear the Lord and keep his commandments.
And that's the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, there's one more
What do you guys think about that?
David,
Yes,
do you know that that book is my favorite book?
it is great.
It is. And COVID, what has been going on, has taught us to appreciate that book more. And the reason why it's my favorite book is because it just gives me a reality check all the time. That I just need to just chill and live. And sometimes we go through so much as Christians because we suffer for Christ's sake. I wouldn't say bad things happen. I wouldn't define it as bad things, much more so sufferings that we experience when we live righteously.
Right.
And Ecclesiastes always bring me back to the point of, listen, don't worry about all of these things. They shall pass. Everything is vanity. Just live and focus on what is mostly important in life. And the other day I was reminded of that when I went to visit my grandmother's house in Three Oaks. And I grew up in Three Oaks Garden. A lot of people don't know that. But my grandmother, who worked so hard, and she had so many houses that she rented out, and she would get up 5 a.m. and the sun shouldn't catch me in the bed and all of that. And she goes to bed late at night, and she just worked very hard. And after she died, the house was given to her husband's son, and then he lost it, and somebody else has it. Now that house was one of the most beautiful homes. It had a lot of garden in front, etc., etc. When I went to visit it a couple of weeks ago, it looked like I don't know, commercialized, so much different, and it made me humble to say, look at how she worked hard, and look at this. Somebody else has it, and it's not as important to them as it was to her. So it just has taught me that we work so hard, but all the things that we may gain also is not as important as people, not as important as, just living and enjoying what the Lord has blessed us with.
Yeah, that's so true. Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else? Yes, Daniel, go ahead. Anybody else on the book of Ecclesiastes? The video was shared. Anything interesting with that?
Yeah, I never saw the two, like the teacher and author before.
Yes.
And it does make sense. I can see why you'll play it. It does help you to understand the book much more.
Right. Yeah. Any comment or question?
Yes. Yeah.
I think it also speaks to the brevity of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And therefore, I don't know if it'll contradict what it says, but we should make the most of it,
Right.
the best of it at all times.
Yeah, but making the most of it, that's right. But how do we make the most of it? I like the emphasis that he places on the end. And you read the book and you see it, and you read towards the end of the book, is how we see the things in life that should become more special to us. Our friendships and beauty of nature, the appreciation of those types of things are much more important than it is for us to run after, as he says, hold things too firmly in our hand. We try to make a lot of money. Nothing wrong with making money, but it becomes our God and possessions, and we run after popularity and things like that, and poof, it's gone. But there was a young lady who was going to speak just before you came in. Who was that?
It was actually Errol. It wasn't a young lady at all. Go ahead, Errol.
Errol, oh, it was Errol. Sorry,
It
man.
wasn't a young lady at all, true.
All
So,
right.
yeah, man, I normally started listening that Bible Project narrative, express as a narrative, and I think they're quite expressive in a way good to for a person to understand
Right.
how a book is written and stuff like that. So I think it's a good example to use to assist in understanding how the Bible
Right.
is read. Yeah, and the whole book of Ecclesiastes is, I mean, we would definitely should try and take it as it is explained, as the young lady had also explained, it really was clear when
Right.
our narrative, our understanding and experience of the book really
Right.
definitely we should not really take for granted or take too much you know I always would say focus on achieving so many stuff, doing stuff. End of the day, it's just a thing that will also pass, and you will also pass and go, and without a chance to enjoy, the good things in life, family and friends, and just
Friends, you know how difficult that is, though. Recently, I had to do some work at my house here. Still hasn't finished yet, but it is 90% done. I had a leak under my shower, and we couldn't find the leak. Eventually, we found that the leak was a busted shower drain, okay, in the floor. It was leaking downstairs, and we had to dig up the whole of the bathroom. And for the 3 or 4 weeks that we doing the project, because in the midst of that, Andrew wanted to come and lock me down and all them things, no movement there, all kinds of things tear up my hair. All I can see is the difficulties in life. That's all I could see. The mounting cost, everything is 2 and 3 times what it cost last year. I don't have the money for it. How do I get through? And I'm sitting down, and God is saying to me, be anxious for nothing. Yes, God, you can say so, but me have to live through this. Be anxious for nothing, which is exactly what Ecclesiastes is saying. Don't take these things so seriously. And guess what? The project isn't done, but it is all the mess is out now. The house is back to what it was before in terms of cleanliness. Those of you who do project stuff know that you clean till you're sick. You know what I mean? And even though we have a little way to go, we look behind us, and I'm looking behind me and I said, my gosh, what were you worried about? What were you worried about? But it is difficult. I'm telling you the
yes,
truth. Very difficult.
understood. Exactly. And when you have priorities and responsibilities where people are putting kind of pressure on you, and it's good to fulfill your priorities and goals and so forth. But how you deal with, are you kind of lay back when you have persons to deal with who are kind of putting a little pressure on you? I
Right.
don't know, everybody asking for a timeline, you're trying to do things timely. You can't be laid back with those type of stuff. It's like a pressure is put on, things need to get done. How you manage, accept, not worrying about it, not taking too much. I mean, these are the things, as you suggested, can be a pressure and can be get you anxious, or you not get anxious when people
Right.
are, putting a timeline on you to get things done, or
Most
you manage
definitely.
yourself, But yeah, it's difficult, and what I mean, we definitely, if we can just call upon on our help for Jesus Christ and allow us to kind of, I mean, I don't know how we're going. Sometimes we don't put ourselves in a headspace that we can say this is what we need to do, and it can work out, but not to too stress on it. But it
Right.
can work out. We're not seeing it instantly, but yeah, if we kind of kick back somewhat and think of it, then maybe we can say there's a way without stressing yourself. You know?
Yeah. One of the things that I try to do is think about other people and the difficulties that they have. And I know time is gone, so I want to wrap up quickly. I think, for instance, tonight about Tina's family and Jermaine's family, that they're going through 200, $300,000 can't bring back Jermaine's family member. And that's just not possible. I find myself in debt because of my house, what is happening, but guess what? Chances are that it's going to be paid off. And I'm going to forget about it. All right? But there are some of us who are going through difficulties in life that no amount of money can correct. All right? And it is our perspective on life that's going to carry us through. Perspective on God, and God who is in charge, and God who's going to accomplish things through us. And every time, this is one of the things I try to do. It doesn't always work. I try to say, okay, there are many people out there who are facing much graver circumstances than you are right now. Okay? So this is not the end of the world. And the end of the world for you as a believer is not a bad thing. It's what you live for. So my friend Barry Wade, who died a few years ago from pancreatic cancer. Some of us know about Barry Wade, environmental solutions man, Christian man, discovered that he had pancreatic cancer and he lived for 4 weeks after discovery. And on his deathbed, a cousin of his came and was extremely angry with God because Barry has been a committed Christian for many, 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 many years. He was in his 70s when he died, right? And he was a committed Christian. And the question his cousin asked him is, how can you maintain faith in God and he's not even delivering you from this illness? And Barry said, but that's why I have faith in God, because I knew that there was a strong possibility that a time like this would come, and the only answer is my faith in God. Okay? And so he died a very contented man, because of his perspective on life. And I'm hoping and praying that I can cultivate that perspective on life and not hold on to things as the preacher in Ecclesiastes warns us about. You hold on to life too hard, and before you know it, it disappoints you. Because you're looking the wrong thing. Stop looking to life and look to the God of life. Because it is in him that we really have eternal life. So I want to close by suggesting to you that the theme of the poetic and the wisdom books is this thing of trusting in God. Trusting in God through the difficulties of life. Trusting in God, for meaning in life. And I want to suggest to you that they point us to Jesus. Because Jesus is the one who comes and he shows us that suffering is a part and parcel of this life. And in some senses, in many senses, it is a doorway to greater achievements in God. Because just like how the Messiah suffered, we will suffer.